it allows us to see through this illusion that we all walk around living from, probably 98% of our waking moments, which is the illusion that there's a me in here, inside of my head, looking out. Now some of you are thinking, oh man, where are we going to go with this, right? And is that really an illusion? Now, there are many ways that we know that this is an illusion. So for one, just to make this, so it doesn't seem like this is something foreign to you, this is actually something you experience rather often. This is not some magical experience of noticing that this me that I always think of as being in here looking out, that can drop away. You can actually have experience without that being there. And it's not as outlandish as you might think. It's not some magical, weird experience. It's very, very subtle. In fact, you probably experience it every morning when you wake up at first. If you really pay attention to waking up, what you might notice in the morning is that there's just a body in bed. And then it's not until something triggers a memory that you start recreating yourself, right? Also, this is the defining characteristic of flow experience. So I don't know if any of you have heard of flow state. A man named Csikszentmihalyi was credited for really not necessarily discovering this state, but really studying it deeply. But I'm sure you've all heard of a musician saying, I was just so in the flow that when I was playing the music, it wasn't me playing the music was just happening, right? Or you hear an athlete, a basketball player who scores 65 points in a game, says that I wasn't there. It was just happening. They were so in the flow. You hear this of painters. You know, the painting was just happening. I wasn't there, and then all of a sudden I came into the picture when it was done and realized, wow, where did this come from? This wasn't me, right? So this is something that is actually not crazy. It's not mystical. It's not magical. This is something that happens rather often. In fact, it probably happens in very subtle moments, just seeing something beautiful, seeing a sunset, seeing the smile of a small child, being in love. You know, when we're truly in love, this sense of separation between ourselves and somebody else, it isn't there. And that's really why we feel so close to somebody that there's literally no separation, you know? So I just add that to, so that you don't think this is something totally foreign that we're talking about. But logically, we know that there's no me that owns this thing, right? That we can find. So for instance, we always say, like, this is my hand, right? Well, what's the me that owns this hand? Is it the arm? No, because we say that's my arm, right? Well, what's the me that owns the arm? Is it the brain? No, because we say that's my brain. What's the me that owns the brain? Where is this thing? This me that we refer to. Now, I'm not saying that you don't exist. Obviously, the human body is sitting here, right? What I'm saying is that this sensation of being a me in here that owns these parts of the body and is looking out is actually an illusion. And it's one that can drop away, and it actually does. It's just that without training, you probably haven't noticed it when it does. And so with training, you can actually notice it when it happens. You can notice there is experience, but there doesn't seem to be an experiencer. There doesn't seem to be the me that I've created in here that's experiencing things. It's just sound, or it's just music. It's just light. It's just feeling. So kind of logically, we can look at it that way. Now in neuroscience, I don't think there's a neuroscientist in the world that has ever found this me that we're looking for when they study the brain. You can't find it. The sense of me is actually created by various parts of the brain, and it can disappear when you actually shut off those areas of the brain. When certain parts of the brain are injured, a lot of what we feel of this sense of being me goes away. For instance, the parietal lobe, I remember reading about this years ago. There's an area of the brain called the parietal lobe that when activity there is shut off completely, it almost eliminates, if not completely eliminates, this sense, the physical sense, the somatic sense of self, where there's this physical boundary between me and the chair. And people who have this area of the brain that's severely injured, sitting down is a nightmare for them because they can't tell where their body ends and the chair begins. And so it's really hard to sit down without feeling like you're just going to fall down. So this is something that the brain is just creating, and it's a very useful creation, right? For us to be able to navigate the world, not bump into things, for instance, to be able to have a conversation and say, oh yes, you're a human being over there, I'm a human being over here, this is a chair that I'm sitting on. The problem is these are all just conventions that are useful for many, many contexts, but we're so conditioned to believing that they're actually real that they constrain our ability to be truly free. So we've talked about two ways that you can kind of see that this me that we believe in isn't there. So one is just logically, and if you want to chat about this another time, I'd be happy to, but there's so many ways you can look at this logically where you see that, yeah, there just isn't, it's just not there. In neuroscience, it's pretty clear that it's not there. But most importantly is you can verify this through your own experience. You can experience what it's like to be perfectly alive and well and not have this sense of there's a me in here looking out. All there is awareness. And the awareness, you'll notice, as we talked about in the introduction today, it has this very spacious quality to it. There's a lot of room. And you can't really pinpoint where it is. It's not that awareness is in here looking out or awareness is over there looking back in. It's both at the same time. In fact, just at a very simple level, you can notice that as you're listening to me speak, maybe looking at me, you can look back at yourself at the same time, and you have this awareness that you're looking right back at that which is being aware. Everyone in this room can do that, right? You're just observing yourself sit in the chair. And if you're really looking at what is looking out, if you can look right back at it, you'll notice that, okay, both are happening at the same time. So now why does this matter, right? Because it sounds like a bunch of crazy talk, right? This idea that this sensation that we have that's just so powerful is actually an illusion. There are many, many illusions that fool us. You can go on YouTube and find hundreds of them, or just you can find a book on illusions. There's so many illusions that just trick the brain into seeing something. I'm sure you've all seen the one where there's one line above the other, right? And at the top there's like little arrows pointing out. On the other one they're pointing in. The one line looks significantly longer than the other one. They're exactly the same length. And even after you know that, even after you measure them, the brain will always tell you one's longer than the other, because it's just the only way the brain can see it. And that's what happens. No matter how intellectually you try to figure out that or convince yourself that this me in here is actually a perceptual illusion, your brain will always tell you, no, it's not, because here it is, I'm right in here looking out, and it feels, doesn't it feel like we're in this body looking out? It is a very strong, visceral sensation. And so there's two ways through your own experience that this drops away. This is one reason that it's sometimes skillful to practice with the eyes open, is that most of it's visual. Most of this illusion is that it really, really feels as though I'm in here looking out. And what happens is when that drops away, it's pretty sharp. It's not anything super magical. It's not mind-blowing. It's just, oh, yeah, there's just seeing right now. It's not coming from here, it's not coming from here, it's just seeing. The other way is, and this is usually much more easily sensed when we're sitting still, is we have this sense of contraction, of just, this is me right here, and I'm like this ball of tightness, right? Sometimes of anxious tightness. And that can loosen up to the point where, almost like we were talking about with the parietal lobe, where it's really, really hard to tell where you begin and something else ends. And of course, it's not that you can't just have that back when you need it because your brain is functioning just fine. It's just that you can see both at the same time. You can see this convention that, yes, this is a body sitting on a chair on the floor, and this is all great. But you also see the other side at the same time, where it's this sense of, yes, these things are all here, but I'm not necessarily in this body looking out. There's just experience, and I can't really find where the center is for it. And it can be a little disorienting at first, but when we learn to rest in it, you might find that this is the most peaceful experience that you'll ever have. There's just absolutely nothing lacking there. There's no one to want anything. There's no one to need anything. It's just, this is it. This is what's here, and it's perfect. And so this is why it's helpful to look into this. And this is all I would encourage you to do. You know, as I think I've mentioned before, you should certainly not just believe anything that I say. And I'm not saying that out of just false humility or something like that. What I'm saying that for is that, you know, this doesn't help at all if it's just something we believe or not believe. What I'm trying to encourage you to do is actually look for your own experience, and what do you notice? And where this can be helpful, and why you should even bother, why should you bother looking, is that this is actually the root cause of all of our suffering. And so I'll try to explain this here as briefly as possible. So I like to think of this as there is essentially an immediate cause of suffering, and then there's a root cause of suffering. The immediate cause of suffering doesn't take much analysis to find. It's just something we might not have noticed before because we don't really pay attention to this process. But the immediate cause of suffering is when there is a desire present and we're identified with it. Or another way of looking at it is there's a desire present and there's no space around it. So here's an example of how obvious this can be. Let's say that you're sitting in a chair and an itch comes up in the middle of your back. You can't reach it. Right? So you're sitting in the chair and there's an itch. This is an unpleasant sensation by definition. No one finds an itch pleasurable unless they're probably masochistic, I would say. It's not normal to think that pain, an itch is a mild form of pain. It's not normal to think that that's pleasurable, at least by our current psychological principles, I think. So this is an unpleasant sensation. It's totally fine that there's an unpleasant sensation there. But then what comes up, if we identify with this sensation, and there's no space around it, we don't see it objectively, then what happens is the next thing that's going to arise is this feeling of, I don't like that. I guarantee it. Right? If we identify with this unpleasant thing is happening to me, the next thing that's going to come up is, I don't like that, because it's natural to not like something that's unpleasant. The problem is if we identify with this feeling of, I don't like this, guess what the next thing to arise is going to be? I want to get rid of it. I want to change this. And if we identify with that, right there is where suffering begins. And you can notice this next time you're sitting and an itch arises. Just notice this process. As soon as an itch, if there's an itch there, and you want to get rid of it, you will notice the body immediately starts getting tense, right? There's this urge that says, I have to get rid of that, and I won't have peace until it's gone. This is what we feel. Now there's only two ways out of that suffering. One is to scratch the itch and get rid of it, right? Which is fine in many cases. There's no problem in doing that. However, what habit of mind are we developing if we just scratch the itch? We're developing the habit that says, I can only have peace when I gratify the desires that arise up inside of me. And that is very problematic. Because what if you can't reach the itch? Or what if you have some pain that just won't go away, physical or emotional, and you want to get rid of it and can't? Then that sense of tension, that suffering that arises feeling like, I won't have peace until this is gone, I won't have peace until this is gone, it's not going to go away. And we're conditioning the mind to react to every unpleasant experience like that. Well, there's another way to be free from that suffering. And that is to just simply recognize there is a desire to get rid of the itch. And again, I encourage you to practice with this. The moment that you notice there is a desire to get rid of the itch, you notice the tension in the body. You might even notice this inner voice talking about like, I just got to scratch, I just got to get rid of this, or whatever the sensation might be. It's probably there, even at a subtle level. As soon as you just notice it and you're completely honest and you recognize it, okay, there is this tension, either mental tension or physical tension. That is desire. As soon as you notice it, you will probably notice that it starts to loosen up a little bit. You'll notice that there's just a little bit of space there. And as long as you're just resting in that awareness, you're not trying to get anywhere, you're just noticing whatever's there. As long as you're just resting there, you'll notice what I think is actually a miracle. It's a very small miracle, but the more that we recognize that it's a miracle, I think the better for our practice. You'll notice that you can sit in discomfort with an itch in the middle of your back and be perfectly at peace. It's no problem. You can do that with other minor discomforts, like you're sitting and your back's a little sore or something like that. Or you're sitting and there's a nagging thought. Whatever the thing is that seems to be a problem, if you follow that process, if you notice the desire, you see it clearly, as soon as it starts to just loosen up a little bit and you're resting in that awareness, you'll notice that you're perfectly at peace. And you'll also notice as soon as it comes back, as soon as there's a desire to get rid of the itch, you're right back in suffering again. So you can notice this little dance, right? But this is so powerful to notice because this can be extrapolated out to anything else in our lives. If you can sit with the mild discomfort of an itch and be perfectly at peace, you can eventually learn to sit and be in moderate to severe pain and be perfectly at peace, even with a smile. You can learn to do the same with emotional pain, things that might have caused us to be just suffering tremendously some time ago. With practice, we can learn to allow this emotional pain to be there, and then we're not adding anything more to it. We have this sense of, oh, it's okay for this to be here. I'm actually at peace with it. There's no problems. And right there, you're already free. And then you'll also notice that the emotion starts to unwind on its own. So this is the immediate cause of suffering. There's like this little chain of events, right? There's this something some sensory stimulus. Then we have either a feeling of I like it or I don't like it. And we can have the same suffering with I like it, right? Like let's say you're at work, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and a thought comes up about the most delicious lunch that you can imagine, right? And you were really engaged in your work, you were enjoying it, but then this thought of lunch comes up, and now all of a sudden work becomes 3 hours of misery until lunch comes around, right? If we're attached to this desire for that awesome lunch. If we just recognize like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have this great lunch, here it is, and we see it with mindfulness, it passes. It might come up again a few minutes later, we see it again and it passes. Now we can enjoy that morning of work, right? We don't have to wait until we have that lunch to be happy. We can be happy right now. And then we can be even more happy when the lunch comes, because here's the interesting part about this. If we're always conditioned to be looking to the future, looking for this, if I gratify this desire, then I'll be happy. If I get this, then I'll be happy. If I get rid of this, then I'll be happy. When is that ever going to come? When is that moment ever going to come where everything's perfect, that we got everything we want and got rid of everything we don't want? If it does, it lasts for maybe a couple minutes. It's just never going to be there. So it's a very unstable place to be. If that's where happiness lies, it's always someplace in the future that we're never going to quite get there. So now we could have this freedom from both, of the suffering of I have to either get something I want or I have to get rid of something I don't want. I can just be with whatever's here and be perfectly happy, be perfectly at peace. This is actually possible for all of us. So now part of this can just happen. You can start to play with this in your practice while you're sitting still or walking or any other moment. Just noticing when there's this identification with desire, just really noticing where does that manifest in the body? Where do I feel that? What is it like in the body and in the mind? And just see it clearly. That in and of itself, you can start to develop this wisdom that, wow, it is possible to be at peace under any circumstance. If I can just learn to recognize when there's this reaction that comes up of, again, it starts with, here's a sensation, I either like it or I don't like it, I either want to keep it or I want to get rid of it, and whenever there's no space between those two desires to either keep it or get rid of it, that's where suffering is going to happen. And as soon as those things are seen with some space, like, oh, here's a desire to get rid of something. Okay, this is fine, and it passes. Now, coming back to this original question, and the reason why I think it's really important to just explore for your own sake, just really start noticing what happens when I am really paying attention to myself. What are the qualities there? Is this sense of me that I believe in so strongly, is it really there? Can I really find this thing? If you look and look and look, can you really find this thing? Or do I just notice spaciousness? And this is what most people, in fact, everyone that's ever seen this quite clearly, this is how it's described, is if you look and look and look and look, eventually you just notice where you thought you were, there's just space there. It's this spacious awareness that has room for the unpleasant things and the pleasant things and everything in between. And so here's the root cause of suffering. The root cause is identifying with this me that's in here looking out and operating as though that's what we are. Because that's what makes it so that when a sensation comes up, it's not just a sensation, it's happening to me. It's happening to me. And if it's happening to me, then I either like it or don't like it. And if I like it, I want to keep it. If I don't like it, I want to get rid of it. All that comes from that fundamental illusion of there's some me in here. When that me is not there, when it's just awareness, then it's just there is a sensation. It's not the sensation is happening to me. It might as well be happening to that chair over there. Like if somebody whacks that chair with a stick, does that bother me? Not in the least, right? It doesn't bother me at all. Now, obviously, if somebody whacks this knee with a stick, there's going to be some physical pain there because there's a brain here that senses what's happening to that, and there might be a pain reflex of pulling the knee back. But if there's no illusion of a me in here that owns the knee, then it's just a knee, just like that's just a chair. And now, when things are seen like that, then it's just, oh, there is some pain, not I am experiencing pain and I don't like it and I want to get rid of it. It's just, there is pain. So suffering can't arise. It's actually impossible. When we're being mindful, when we're just being the awareness that knows what is arising and knows that there is awareness there, suffering cannot arise. Now, of course, the ideal here is that we can train to the point where we never have suffering in our lives, right? And of course, there's nothing wrong with aspiring to that. However, I would suggest to you that that's a pretty lofty and rather unrealistic goal. Okay, what is possible is that little by little, we can suffer less. And in any moment, and this is where it's really, really important, is our brain tends to think in terms of this me in here, right? So immediately we think of, there could be a me that doesn't suffer, right? Well, guess what? If there's a me in there that doesn't suffer, you're going to suffer because you're still believing this illusion that there's a me in there. What is possible is, in this moment, what can you do? And the answer is right before you. In this moment, you can be aware. You can simply recognize, without any judgment or analysis, just simply recognize what is actually here. And then you can do it again in this moment. then you can do it again in this moment. And what I would encourage you to pay attention to is that in any moment that you do that, you're free. There is no suffering. In that moment. It might come right back the next moment. But in that moment where you're just aware of what's happening, this essentially effortless awareness of just knowing, there's no problem, there's no suffering. And so this is just something, again, you can verify with your own experience. Just notice what happens. If you're in there trying to get stuff and do stuff and get rid of that itch and change this and fix that and judge this and analyze that, it's going to be a mess. But in any moment that you just recognize that all that's happening and you just see it, right there, there's peace. In fact, I would just go one step further with this. That I think we are literally actually in heaven right now. We just don't recognize it because the mind always wants something better. Right? I mean, you probably noticed this. You could be on vacation in the most beautiful place in the world, right? And if you're arguing with your spouse or annoyed with the kids or it rains or whatever, you're not in paradise. But you are in paradise, you know? But I would suggest to you that actually this is it. And here's why it doesn't seem so special. And in fact, it's it the moment that you become aware, the moment that you become mindful, there's peace. And I think if we're really honest, what is it that we're looking for? It's that, right? It's just peace, the absence of suffering, the absence of wanting something better. That right there is perfect. And then the mind comes in and says, well, that's kind of boring. You know, like what about some fireworks or some pizza or something? You know? Like this is just what the mind does. It immediately jumps to like, oh, but there's got to be something else. No, it's just this. That's it. It's perfect. Now, why doesn't it seem so special? Two reasons. One is that because for the most part, we only spend a brief second or two there, and then we revert right back to identifying with our thinking. So it's kind of like, imagine we are in paradise. Imagine we're in Hawaii, and there's this beautiful waterfall right here. I mean, it's just perfect temperature. There's no mosquitoes in Hawaii. It's just perfect. But instead of seeing any of that, we're on a cell phone having a text argument with a family member back home, right? We're literally in paradise, but we're so identified with this argument that we don't see it. Now, occasionally we might look up and get a quick glance. Oh yeah, there's a waterfall. Then we're right back into it. Do I really know that I'm in heaven? That I'm in paradise? No, it's just I get this quick glance of something and I'm right back into suffering by messing with this argument on a device, right? So I would suggest that this is a similar analogy to what's happening every moment. It's like any moment that we wake up to mindfulness, it's perfect. And it's just we get these little glimpses, so it doesn't seem like we're in paradise. It doesn't seem like there's waterfalls and everything because it's just these little glimpses here and there. And so now here's where the practice can become so beautiful, is that when we are making some intentionality about doing the practice, and this mindfulness starts to be sustained, this starts to be revealed to you quite clearly. Without any effort, if you're just being this knowing awareness without even trying, so you're using the mindfulness practices, these skillful means to wake up to mindfulness, and eventually you start to rest in this awareness a little bit, even if it's just 15 seconds or so, it starts to become really clear. Like, this is what I've always been looking for. What I've been looking for my entire life has always been right here. I never had to go anywhere to find it. It's always right here. And it becomes more and more clear to you that that's the case. Now, the other reason it doesn't seem so special is that because we're bouncing back and forth again, there's a lot of anxiety in our lives, right? There's a lot of suffering that arises, and so we tend to think of these states of like, oh, I've either arrived or I haven't, and It's not really how it works. It's more of like, this is a moment of peace, or it's a moment of, there's a lack of peace, and that's okay. But this is another area where it can become really, really obvious that what you've been looking for your whole life happens the moment that you just wake up to mindfulness. And that is when you are in suffering. When there is a state of suffering there that's intense, and you wake up to mindfulness and you can see it all clearly and say, it's okay for this to be here. And you even turn towards it and look at, well, where is this suffering? And where is this me that's suffering? All that energy can sometimes just make it so obvious. Like suffering is immediately transformed into joy. Now, I'm not saying that joy is what we're looking for. Joy arises naturally as you spend more and more time resting in this mindfulness. Joy just becomes kind of the backdrop for everything. But it's not that you've experienced joy right away. However, when you're in suffering and you can remember to do this practice, that's often what arises. Because there's just such a relief of, wow, I was in this suffering, and then just within seconds, I wasn't. There's some joy there. So all this is just, sorry for the long explanation here, but this is the encouragement for why, as silly as that exercise might seem, of just practicing looking outwardly and then looking in and just noticing the difference, is that you might start to notice, like, oh, yeah, maybe that sense of me that in here that I believe in so strongly, maybe it's not so solid as I thought it was, you know, and it's not an intellectual thing, it's just more of it's almost like an intuition, you know, like, oh, there's just things happening here. So that explanation was just encouragement to look, you know, to just to take a look. Hello, my friend, and thank you for taking a minute to check out this video here at the Mindfulness Edge. I hope that you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Please feel free to leave any questions that you have about the practice down in the comment section below if you think I could be of help. I do my best to answer as many of those questions as I can, and I enjoy helping wherever I can. If you found the video helpful, please feel free to subscribe to this channel and make sure that you never miss any of the videos that we post. And you could also feel free to go ahead and hit that little like button. That will help other people to see this video, and hopefully it will be of help to them as well. And if you like, I have a little gift for you. If you head on over to themindfulnessedge.com, I'd be happy to give you free sample chapters of my book called The Mindfulness Edge. So until next time, I hope you are well.